Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Digital Amicus. My name is Abdul Haseeb Qazi, and today we're going to have a discussion on statelessness in Pakistan. To put the topic in context, I would first like to explain, and before moving on to introduce our guest, I'd just like to explain what statelessness is in terms of international law. And I think to better understand statelessness, it's important to understand and put it in context with different concepts such as a refugee uh, and a political asylum seeker. So, what basically a refugee is a citizen and a national of state A, and for a number of reasons that citizen has moved or been displaced to state B. Now in this situation there are two states involved, and the refugee basically is the national of a single, at least one state. And if we talk about under international law, asylum seekers are basically, they qualify the same conditions, but their status of refugee has still not been fulfilled. But when we talk about statelessness or stateless peoples, there is no state involved. Stateless people do not have any state to which they have a, to which they have, to which of which they are citizens, or any state that claims these people to be their citizens and bestowing some kind of some rights at least to these people. So there is no state A or state B in terms of stateless people. There is an international framework that deals with stateless people. There is the 1954 Convention on Stateless Peoples, which provides a complete framework for states to deal with stateless peoples. But unfortunately, Pakistan is not a party to this 1954 convention. And to better understand the concept of statelessness and the stateless peoples in Pakistan, we would like to move towards the domestic regime that deals with the concepts of citizens and being stateless. And for that purpose, we have with us to talk at length about statelessness in Pakistan, we have Ms. Tahera Hasan. Uh, Ms. Tahera has an illustrious uh, career in human rights and litigation. Particularly, she is a lawyer by profession. She specializes in family law, dealing with domestic and international adoption cases, custody cases, divorce and khula matters, and family settlements. She has assisted foreign courts with reference to adoption processes. She is also the founder and director of Imkaan Welfare Organization. Imkaan was created with the sole purpose of child welfare at its core and runs projects in relation to the same, including a child adoption program, a mother and child healthcare center, a maternity home, Khel, a learning and recreational center, Pasbane Mahal, a solid waste management project, and they also have a legal aid center. Ms. Hassan's work further comprises raising awareness and advocacy initiatives on the issue of Bengali statelessness in Pakistan. So one thing most notable about Ms. Hassan's career is that she has worked at the grassroots level, and she has worked with the communities, and she understands what the practical problem, in addition to the gaps in the law that are exploited to put these communities at a disadvantage. She is also aware of the practical grassroots problems. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Tahera Hassan. Thank you so much, Ms. Tahera, for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Haseeb, for having me. I mean, it's always wonderful to be able to talk about this particular subject because generally there's very little know-how about it. And it's so important for us to create awareness around statelessness because it is also, violative of so many basic human rights to people that are living within our country. So it's definitely a pleasure to be here.
So, Ms. Hassan, if you could explain to us what the law of citizenship in Pakistan really is, because clearly we're not a party to the international framework, and that obviously leads us to consider the local framework and the gaps in the local framework. And what are the stateless communities in Pakistan? Where do they live? And what are the statistics that we should be aware of pertaining to these stateless communities?
Well, I mean, let's the one of the biggest stateless communities here is the Bengali-speaking stateless community, and they are. I mean, for the Bengalis, you'll also include the Burmese, the Rohingyas. They all overlap and form part of that community. There are approximately estimated 3 million Bengali-speaking people in Pakistan, and out of that. About 98% they claim are in Karachi. There are approximately 126 communities in which these people are living, which is scattered all over Karachi. So that is what we're looking at. The community that we work in is Machar Colony, which is one of the largest Kachi Abadis, informal settlements in Karachi. And we've been working there with all the projects that you have mentioned for the past 8, 9 years. And during this course of time, we've been dealing with issues that are surrounding statelessness and the impact of statelessness on the lives of people generally. When we're talking about legal framework, I mean, you highlighted the fact that we are not signatories to international conventions. And of course, that as a nation, I mean, that is a setback, because when you are signatories to international conventions, that you are bound to be performing and doing certain things which find resolutions to certain issues. So we are not in that scope. However, having said that, we do have a local legal framework that is compassionate and that does provide for relief as far as stateless communities are concerned. So the basic, I mean, at the forefront of it, of course, you have the Constitution, which talks about citizens. Then subsequently, I mean, the only problem that we do face is that the definition of citizen has been left open as far as the Constitution is concerned, to be determined by law. So when we look at the law, we have the citizenship law and we have the Nadra laws that deal with registration of citizens. And in both, again, a citizen is somebody who attains the age of 18. There is not a detailed definition of the same. Now, there are multiple ways in which citizenship can be acquired. We have citizenship by birth. We have citizenship by descent, by migration, by naturalization, by marriage. For the perspective, you know, when we're looking at the Bengali stateless community or the stateless communities, I think the important one, as far as the mode for obtaining citizenship is concerned, is citizenship by birth and citizenship by naturalization. Now, these two are present in the law, and if we look at them, I mean, if the law is followed to the letter, then we would not be having issues of statelessness as such. We also have the Citizenship Act, which talks about, in which Section 16A specifically talks about Bengali people, Bengali speaking people who are in Pakistan. So it is good to understand that this came about, you know, during 1971, when the separation happened between East and West Pakistan, and Bangladesh was formed, and there were some migrations at that point. There were people living in West Pakistan from East Pakistan also. And in the subsequent coming years, in the early 70s, there were two types of migrations. One were permanent and one were for economic reasons. The migrations that were economic reasons, those people who came through legal channels eventually went back. However, the other migrations that happened, and the people who had been living here, have been living here since 1969, 1970, moving on to the early and mid 70s. Now, to take care of this, we have Section 16A, which provides that anybody who can show proof of having lived here prior to 1971 is entitled to citizenship. Now, that proof is in form of documentation. It can be, you know, ship tickets, it can be ration cards. It's a mix of documents, home papers, marriage, birth, any kind of documentation that gives proof of the fact that you have been living here. Now, when you look at the framework, it is all present. You know, I mean, if we were working according to, if there was proper implementation of the law, taking in the concept of Section 16A with the Bengali speaking population, taking in birthright citizenship and then naturalization also, I think that more than, you know, half of our stateless problems would be resolved right there and then. The challenge that comes in is more so of the implementation of the law and not so much the absence of a law. So I think that is where we're dealing with, you know, huge hurdles.
So, as you mentioned, that there were a number of there were certain waves of population that came from Bangladesh to Pakistan after the separation in 1971. So there are problems that were obviously faced by that population decades ago. But then I understand and I assume that there are these populations have younger generations, people who were born in Pakistan, as opposed to those who came to Pakistan. So are these newer generations of the Bengali speaking population having the same problems as their elders had decades ago?
No, they're absolutely the same problems. I mean, children who were born here 30 years ago, children who are being born here today, none of them have access to identity. Because when you go to the NADRA offices, the link to identity that they ask for is your parents' identity. And in most cases, that does not exist. I mean, another important thing in this landscape, as far as the legal framework is concerned, is to understand that prior to the formation of the National Alien Registration Authority, which was in the year 2000. Now, the purpose for the formation of that authority was to regularize and to document all aliens that are living within Pakistan, and to be able to, of course, provide them basic rights. Now, what happened at that time was, again, an implementation problem, because that law was used subsequently uh, to discriminate against people rather than to empower them. So we have people who had manual identity cards prior to the computerization. And you will find multiple cases when we deal with the kind of work that we do on a daily basis. We find multiple cases where we have the cancellation of citizenship because of somebody going and doing a biometric on a NARA card, a National Alien Registration Authority card. Now, that makes no sense anyway, that if I have a passport, I have a CNIC, I have all my documents, why would I go and get them cancelled by biometricing on a NARA card? Now, that is where the aspect of discrimination, ethnic discrimination, discrimination on the basis of language comes up. So we have incidences where we have people saying that they were forced to biometric on the NARA cards, or they were not told what they were biometricing on, or that they were, forced to and made to do this with under duress. So these factors come in, and it is very evident that if you do have a passport and you've been traveling and you've been enjoying all rights as a citizen, the discrimination and the misuse of the law is very, very apparent. I mean, there's no two ways about the fact that it was misused. So these are the challenges. And even today, I mean, in the projects that we are running, what happens with these stateless communities is that you have, I mean, because as you mentioned yourself when you started the conversation, is that citizen is a stateless person is somebody who's not recognized by any state. So because of the lack of recognition, what happens is that they are deprived of education, which is a complete, I mean, that completely marginalizes the community and does not give them the room or the space to grow, because you cannot access schools without your child registration certificate, your BAE form. You cannot sit for your metric exam without that. You cannot go to university without it. And therefore, these people are caught in that loop and stuck there. So that is one thing. The second thing that you cannot do is access to health. Um, we find that these communities are completely devoid of any healthcare facilities other than the ones that some NGOs might be providing to them. They cannot access government health facilities because of lack of identity. Employment is a problem. You can't have a bank account. You can't have a SIM card. You can't own a house. You can't run a business. Basically, you can do nothing. So we are, with these communities, caught up in this loop. Now, in our projects, one of the projects that we run is a learning and recreation center. And in the learning and recreation center, we've been dealing with, we have a gymnastics team that has come out of that. And I repeatedly talk about them as an example every time I'm given an opportunity to speak, because here we have, 9, 7, 8 girls, 5, 6 boys who are brilliant. I mean, the girls are clearly, they're winning all inter-school competitions. They're doing really well. But we are stuck now because we can't take them forward without their identity. We can't take them national. We can't take them international. We can't get them jobs even as gymnastics coaches. So they have no progress or no possibility of progress, which is very serious.
So, how do you address these problems through the platform of Imkaan or the other projects that you're running? So, I understand that some micro level problems could be redressed and they could be mitigated. But you mentioned in the beginning that this is a community of 2 to 3 million people that we're talking about here. So, in terms of such a large scale community with all their problems ranging from education, healthcare, identity, the financial, the rights to access the financial market, such as having something as basic as a bank account. So how do you address these problems on a large scale, and what redressal, if any, do these people have in the current in the current legal framework of Pakistan to get their problem solved, or
Look, I
if
mean,
there is any?
no, it's all about political intent at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's like I said, it's your laws are there. It's not such a big issue, but the challenge is that to get that implementation to be done. As far as we're concerned, as far as Imkaan is concerned, we do also run a legal aid center, and we provide assistance to people struggling with issues of identity. Now, the one overwhelming thing that we have seen with people coming to us is that I would say that about 80% of the people who have come to us are people who have had identity. They are not people who've never had identity. So we have a very small percentage who has never had identity. We have blocked CNICs. We have CNICs that are in investigation. We have passports that have been cancelled. We have families that have been put on hold and have been given the runaround with no resolution. So these are the different stages that things are at. And part of our work, I mean, a huge part of our work is, of course, even within the communities. I mean, we're working in one community, but we are making linkages with other Bengali speaking and stateless communities. One of the important things is to create an awareness about their rights. Because there is, due to a complete lack of education, there is a lack of knowledge as to what exactly they are entitled to. So the moment you empower people with knowledge, they are able to stand their ground better and to process and fight for what is rightfully theirs in the due course, right? However, the other thing is we do a lot of advocacy work. We do make contact and are trying to bring this to the forefront in terms of conversations with the government to try and find a resolution to this particular issue, in fact, to the fact of non-implementation of the law. We do provide services within the community, but then that, of course, is targeted only to that certain community. So we might be providing relief as far as that community is concerned with the different projects we run. However, the important, it's not something that can be done without government intervention and government support. So I think the important issue here is for the state to recognize the existence of these people, for the state to also push the implementation of the very laws that they themselves have created. So it's not about reinventing the wheel. We don't want, I mean, it would be fantastic if there were new laws, but they're not really needed to resolve 80% of the problems. We need government departments to be more sympathetic and less rigid, and to deal with these people without any discrimination. I think that is where the key issue comes up.
So speaking of government intervention, we witnessed throughout 2020 that there were a lot of government-sponsored programs in the context of COVID. Because of COVID, there was a lockdown across the board, and the government, one way or the other, provided, the federal government as well as the provincial governments, they provided one program or the other to people who were really in need, and a lot of people availed those programs and benefited. So are we saying that because these people, these communities were not recognized, have throughout not been recognized by the governments, they were not even recognized in times of COVID to provide ration or the SARS card or anything of the sorts?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what we're saying. I mean, this is something that we've been highlighting and talking about also, and were during the beginning periods of the lockdown and when the pandemic struck. The fact is that people without CNICs were not made part of the SARS program,
Okay.
which I feel is very, very serious. I mean, there can be other mechanism of documentation. We had even proposed issuance of a ration card to communities where one could, I mean, that's how it worked in the 70s, and that's how it worked prior to that, where these people could have gotten that relief. And sadly enough, I mean, the other thing that happened, despite the fact that we did not form part of any government relief programs, what also happened was that due to the magnitude of the problem, even for non-governmental organizations, there was a stipulation of using the CNIC for even giving out ration. So that even took that away. So there were a very few handful of, 3, 4 organizations that were distributing ration in these stateless communities. So they were completely left out of the loop. So that was a huge hurdle. And also, with regard to healthcare and other services, I think it just it just became a problem. And obviously the financial crunch at that time was intense, and everybody did suffer, but these communities suffered more because they did not have a hope of any kind of resolution or hope of any kind of assistance coming their way.
So, if we are talking about what the government can and should do about these stateless communities, so and if you talk about, as I mentioned in the beginning, you worked with these people, you understand their grassroots problems. So, don't you think that one of the grassroots problems for the government could perhaps be that if they uh, recognize their citizenship and if they bestow all the fundamental and basic rights on these people, don't you think, because you mentioned in the beginning that majority of these stateless communities are based in the city of Karachi, and we already know that the Karachi's infrastructure could not keep pace with the pace of the growing population. So don't you think the government also realizes that one of the grassroots problems with recognizing these people would be to introduce or open another floodgate of population in the city of Karachi?
No, I mean this is an existing population, right? I mean it's been
Okay.
existing here. You don't need to worry about what's going to happen in the future, but retrospectively, I mean these are populations that have lived here for the past 40 years, 50 years, and and are recognized by the law. Either we don't have the legal framework, or we say that birthright citizenship should be removed from the law. Then I would understand. And the other question that comes up, Haseeb, is what are you planning on doing with them? uh, there's no repatriation. As somebody's been here since 1969, 1970. Um, what is it exactly that we want to do with this population or with our stateless populations? As far as education is concerned, I think that I mean, in my opinion, the stipulation of having a child registration certificate uh, should be removed as far as education is concerned. I think a school enrollment should be good enough for you to be able to sit for your exams and do your high school. We need to be issuing some student cards. We can't be depriving people of their right to education and their right to health. And I mean, obviously, because otherwise they have no progress. They're not going to move ahead at all. The other thing that I'd want to highlight, which I've again is something that I repeatedly talk about, is that we also deal with mental health in the community that we work in, and we have a mental health clinic, which has been a huge eye opener for us, because I mean we did it as a project of passion, because we thought that mental health is something that's completely not recognized or addressed. Here people are struggling for health otherwise, and this is something that's completely marginalized. And the very interesting thing that has come up in terms of the statistics that we are looking at is that we have people coming to us, and majority of them come to us with anger issues. And when you link the anger issues with the reason for the anger, it 80 to 83% of them come up with lack of access to education as being the primary source of anguish in their lives. So we have kids that are caught up in a loop, which is very destructive. They have no outlets, they have no facilities, they live in a completely dire straits kind of an environment. So what we're producing, then we wonder why the rate of crime goes up. I mean, if we are going to provide no platform at all for the youth to be able to use their abilities or to be able to build towards anything, then obviously we're going to have people going towards drug addiction and going towards crime, and especially in stateless communities, because they actually have no hope. I mean, these are generations of statelessness, right? I mean, it is something that is inherited. I'm stateless, my children will be stateless, subsequently my grandchildren will be stateless, and there is no resolution to it. So we are that's the kind of landscape we're looking at. And I think that without going into the politics of it, I think it is time for the state to sit back and take a look at what exactly it is that they want to do with these communities. I mean, it's well and good to say that, I mean, I understand the politics of it. I understand the fact that we've had an influx into Sindh, into Karachi. That is all understandable. But let the existing communities that are here, we do need to do something about them. And I think that we need to look at it, distance ourselves a little bit and look at it and look for solutions. And the solution is basically the implementation of our own existing laws.
So, coming to some solutions, if you could talk about one or two particular solutions that, in your view and in your experience, would be, I think, would be a big breakthrough for mitigating the anguish and the mitigating the anguish of these people and bringing them at least at par with other communities that are living in Pakistan. So, what
Look,
one or two major solutions that, in your opinion, think are going to be the change maker?
Look, there are two or three things. I think the major thing is, obviously they want citizenship, they want identity, they are entitled to it. But one of the major things is at least grant them education, give their children access to education, give them access to healthcare, and make the system that exists, the laws that exist, implement them. Make your departments more compassionate. There is you will be surprised that there is a lot of discrimination on the basis of language. There is a lot of discrimination on the basis of ethnicity. People go to offices, and now this is not a department. It's not that the department has taken a decision on top that every Bengali speaking people that comes to them, they're going to be discriminated at. This is individual level discrimination, right? This is what your frontline workers are. The frontline workers need to be trained and sensitized. They need a framework from the government to work within, where these things are, they should be trained and these things should be addressed. As to, if somebody who looks Bengali comes to you, you dismiss them just because they look Bengali. We know of cases where people with identity cards have been refused access to health due to the fact that they look a certain way. Now, despite the fact that they have identity. Now, these are things that we need to work around. This hatred, this discrimination needs to be watered down, which can be done through trainings and sensitization. I would go to the extent of saying that, especially for this population, even departments that are dealing with identity should have separate counters. You do have Bengali speaking people who have identity, you do have Bengali speaking people who are educated, and I think they should be integrated into the systems to have those counters, because a lot of times we see mistakes happening in filing of identity applications just because the applicant is illiterate. He is unable to read what has been written. You have, and a lot of ID cards are blocked because of that, by the way. They're blocked because of wrong information, wrong data being entered. Now, the wrong data is not being entered because the information they're giving is wrong. The wrong data is being entered because they're incapable and unable of reading the information that's been put in. So I might go in with a mother's name and say it in a certain way, and something else is written, which creates a problem moving on, and that's when my documents are blocked. We have multiple cases of these kind of issues that have arisen. So I think providing that kind of framework, you can have certain centers which deal with this population, and staff that is sensitized and trained to deal with these kind of issues, knowing full well what the legal framework is. I think that would be a really good step forward.
Well, excellent proposals, and I agree that access to education and access to healthcare should be universal. And I think that's going to be a really good starting point. And I completely agree with you on this. This is going to be a really good starting point in mitigating the problems that these communities have been facing for decades. So, Ms. Hassan, just one last question about your organization, and particularly the community that we have on social media consists of law students and young lawyers. So anyone who is interested in working pro bono towards helping these stateless communities, or perhaps working with your organizations, what are some of the options that they can consider either as a citizen in playing their role, or as a lawyer in perhaps who are interested in human rights?
Look, I think one of the most important things is to make this a talking point within the legal circles. It is not something that's been talked about at all. That awareness will automatically filter into the way that we all deal with things on a day-to-day basis when we are confronted with these issues. Of course, in terms of liaising with anybody, talking to anyone wanting to come and volunteer with us or doing an internship for a short period of time, or learning how these things work, our doors are always open. And if there are any suggestions as to how we can collaborate to take these things forward. I mean, we need more than just one organization that is working on these issues. And with the knowledge that we have and with the experience that we have, I think collaborative efforts in taking things forward would also have an impact. So I definitely think that there's room for a lot of work for all of us to do together as far as the legal fraternity is concerned.
Well, thank you so very much, Ms. Hassan, for being with us today. It was a real pleasure to talk to you about statelessness and the legal framework and the practical problems that these communities are facing, and of course, the way forward and the solutions that we as a community can provide to these stateless people. So, on that note, I would like to thank you once again and signing off with Digital Amicus. Allah Hafiz. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.